So I'm Rebecca Coles. I'm one of the Montane athletes and I'm a climber. Been climbing, well, probably about 20 years now. And yeah, since kind of the end of school and then more into university, and then continued as a hobby, then as a profession, becoming a mountaineering and climbing instructor. And now, on my work is all climbing, and then on my days off I go climbing. I enjoy kind of a broad spectrum of climbing, from rock climbing through to Scottish winter climbing, through to alpinism, and then high altitude mountaineering as well. Occasionally you do have experiences that are scary. But actually, most of the time, climbing isn't scary at all. I don't think I'd do it if I was scared most days I went out. So those experiences are sort of few and far between, and most of the time it's kind of very on the enjoyable end of the spectrum. I've been thinking about the performance edge, especially in mountaineering media and in literature in particular. What sells is sort of going right to the edge and sometimes even crossing that line and tragedies occurring. But that's not my experience of climbing and mountaineering. And there's a huge amount of uncertainty sometimes with climbing, and it depends on the type of climbing. But it's coping with that uncertainty in the mountains. And one thing that I do really enjoy is planning expeditions to remote places to try and climb mountains that haven't been climbed before. And this introduces even more uncertainty because it's never been done before. Some people really shy away from uncertainty, and they don't like the prospect of going to try and do something that's so uncertain. You don't know whether there's going to be success or failure. To be honest, the odds are sort of stacked towards the not succeeding rather than succeeding. And I've certainly had quite a few trips to attempt first ascents that haven't resulted in a summit. But all that experience does build up, and you do learn probably more from the failures than from the successes. And eventually, sometimes you might get a success. So it was in November 2016 when I went out to the far west of Nepal to try and climb a first ascent. But we got this picture of a really stunning mountain. And if you imagine a mountain a child would draw, really pointy and snowy and really isolated and beautiful. So I was really kind of drawn to this picture and really wanted to go. And yeah, so much uncertainty, logistics to a really remote part of Nepal. It would be really key that we could get those logistics organised to get anywhere near the mountain. And then would we be good enough? Would the conditions and the weather mean that we could get on the mountain? So everything was kind of going really well. And all that uncertainty and all that worry that we had before going was disappearing. And we could now get on with the job of climbing the mountain. And then we had our first setback. And it was a pretty major one. We'd come to climb a mountain that hadn't been climbed before, and we wanted to make this first ascent, and we found evidence of a camp and climbing equipment. So it was clear that we weren't the first climbers to have ever been to this point. And so it threw the whole project into doubt, really. Someone that we didn't know about had potentially climbed this mountain. They'd certainly looked like they'd had a go at it. But then you have to remind yourself you're in an incredible part of the world. It's an incredible privilege to be there. The weather was good, the mountain looked stunning. You know, you just have to recalibrate and say, well, we're still going to go and climb it. You know, it may or may not be a first ascent, we don't know now. And then the next blow kind of, or realisation of the next problem we were going to have, and that was the snow conditions. The snow was really soft and unconsolidated, and I've never experienced snow like that before, but we were wading through this snow. We were just a team of 2, so we were taking in turns to break trail. But to be honest, it didn't make any difference whether you were going first or second. You still seemed to be sinking just as much. We had to descend because we had a forecast of some high winds coming through. And that meant that we really had a very short window now to attempt the peak. So as soon as the weather cleared through, we headed back up and started up a route that we were unsure whether it would go, and we had hours and hours of wading through this snow. And at one point my climbing partner just stopped and said, "This is futile, this is absolutely pointless. We've only got one day to summit the following day before we start having to head back down, and we're getting nowhere near where we need to be to attempt it." So I let him have his rant, and then I said, "Oh, well, shall we see how high we can get?" And off we went again. And I think he, without a doubt, he says he would have turned around and gone back down there. But I thought, well, it's worth just keeping going and seeing how far we get. And we eventually got onto the ridge at dawn, I think, by then. And then, thankfully, the snow had improved. Now, one really interesting thing was that low down we'd come across some fixed ropes from this previous expedition that we didn't know about. But as the terrain got more difficult on the ridge, we didn't see any of these ropes. So because the ropes low down were on relatively easy ground, we then started to think that potentially the team hadn't got as high as we now were. And so that kind of bolstered our spirits. We thought, actually, maybe it hasn't been climbed before. And we were tantalisingly close to the summit as it became the afternoon, and thinking about whether we needed to turn around and get back down and get back before it went dark again. It was brilliant to be up there, but I think what struck me more than anything else on this summit, that actually no one has seen this view with their own eyes from that exact spot before. And I thought, actually, that's quite special. So part of my planning for any sort of trip is that things are not going to quite go to plan, and whether that be the logistics and flight delays or kit getting lost en route, and then on the mountain your proposed kind of route not being the same and having to pick a different route. On this trip, actually, we'd miscalculated the amount of matches we needed, and being able to light fires and stoves is really fundamental to the success of an expedition. And I've known trips to completely fail because they've bought dodgy lighters in country and all the lighters have failed. So we were a bit short of matches, and we had a few other. I think we had a lighter that wasn't very reliable, and had a flint and steel which is useful for lighting gas stoves. So yeah, we had to kind of really watch that and ration the matches. But that could have meant the end of the trip for us. Sometimes when you actually get on the mountain, you feel like more things are in your control and it's a bit easier. Sometimes the key to success is not actually sticking to the plan, is changing the plan and being adaptable and flexible and reacting to the circumstances rather than sticking to what you planned beforehand, no matter what. So I think it's really important to choose when you're going to push yourself. So for example, actually when I'm climbing in remote places like in the Himalayas, I actually choose to stay within my technical climbing comfort zone, because the consequences of things going wrong in such remote places are so serious. And then when I say go to the Alps, then that's the time where I can push my kind of technical ability climbing wise.